The lawyer had barely reached the fourth line when Camilla's son snapped, read that again, and suddenly Ravensmere stopped feeling like a royal estate and started looking like a crime scene disguised as inheritance. Prince Wiliam was not staring at the document anymore. He was holding 3 antique keys, not as a gesture of welcome, not as a family courtesy, but as a silent confiscation across the table. Camilla did not move. Her children did not move. Even King Charles, the man who had allowed one dangerous assumption to harden for years, sat trapped by the chilling possibility that Ravensmere had never truly belonged to the people who had already begun acting like its future owners. The ambush began at 8:46 on a damp English morning, with no motorcade, no royal announcement, and no flashing palace theatrics. Only one dark vehicle sliding through the eastern gates like a warning nobody understood quickly enough. Wiliam stepped out with 2 solicitors behind him, both carrying identical black briefcases, and that symmetry was the first clue that this was not a family visit. Then came the second clue. He refused the grand entrance, avoided the staircase, ignored the formal drawing room, and walked past the warm fireplaces toward the forgotten estate office, where land records had slept since Queen Victoria's time. Wiliam was telling everyone, without saying it, that this was not negotiation. This was execution. By 9:05, Camilla was told Wiliam was inside Ravensmere, and she assumed the meeting concerned renovations. That assumption was her first mistake. The estate needed serious repairs. 2 ancient lead roofs were leaking, threatening historic plasterwork, and quiet talks had already begun about converting outer cottages for her extended family. Charles had privately supported the idea, though never formally, and that difference between private encouragement and legal authority was about to become the crack that swallowed everything. To Camilla's circle, Ravensmere was settled. To Wiliam, every plan, every invoice, every room being prepared had become evidence. For nearly 15 years, 5 words had floated through the family like a promise: you'll always have Ravensmere. But promises become dangerous when people start spending money around them. Camilla's family arrived expecting signatures, not confrontation. They believed the 12,000-acre estate, the Jacobean manor, the 42 cottages, the 2 working farms, and the private lake were already drifting toward them. Rare paintings not listed in any public royal inventory hung inside rooms staff treated as future Parker Bowles territory. One upstairs space was already being called Mr. Parker Bowles' study. Fresh flowers had been placed there that morning. Even the underground wine cellar had been toured like a coming inheritance. Then, Wiliam placed a 6-page legal opinion on the wooden table and detonated the fantasy with one sentence: none of you were ever beneficiaries. Everything changed. The cottages, the paintings, the horses planned for the southern paddocks, the architects measuring antique doorways, the wine bottles casually described as available, all of it suddenly looked less like preparation and more like trespass by confidence. Camilla's family had not merely misunderstood a future arrangement. They had behaved as if history, bloodline, trustees, and law were obstacles already conquered. But Wiliam refused to reveal who truly controlled the future of Ravensmere. Not yet. Shortly after 9:20, Camilla entered the Cold Estate office, nervous now, and Charles followed minutes later with a tight jaw and rigid posture. He was visibly irritated because he believed this confrontation should have been brought to him privately. He expected royal deference. Wiliam did not stand when the king entered. That tiny refusal turned the air sharp. One hand rested on a cracked leather folder marked with a faded gold crest, and Charles recognized it immediately. It belonged to the Queen Mother. In that instant, the king's confidence drained because the battle was no longer between Wiliam and Camilla's children. The dead had entered the room. Charles had not bought Ravensmere, had not received it from the state, and did not hold it as ordinary crown estate property. Ravensmere belonged to a private family settlement designed by people who understood that wealth must be defended before sentiment arrives. The settlement had been changed 3 times, once to protect agricultural land, once to protect the manor's assets, and once to protect the succession clause nobody had dared inspect closely enough. Charles held only a life interest. He could use Ravensmere, maintain it, and receive income from its farms, but he could not transfer ownership outside the direct royal bloodline. Not by promise, not by letter, not even by royal command. Camilla's daughter asked the question everyone feared. If Charles controlled Ravensmere during his lifetime, why could he not decide what happened after? William's solicitor opened the faded folder, and the sound of old paper became louder than any royal title in the room. The answer was devastating, because that choice had been legally taken from Charles before his marriage, not after. Before, everyone expected Queen Elizabeth's name. Instead, the amendment was signed and notarized in late 1999, 3 years before the Queen Mother died and 6 years before Charles married Camilla in 2005. Beside the Queen Mother's shaky signature was Princess Margaret's bold one. That was the bloodline trap. Princess Margaret, one of the original trustees, had feared Ravensmere could pass through a future marriage into a family never intended by the original settler. She named no one, yet her wording named everyone. No spouse, no child of a spouse, and no descendant unrelated by direct blood to King George VI could ever gain permanent title, controlling interest, or beneficial ownership. Camilla's children were not personally insulted. They were structurally erased before they even knew the estate existed. Then, Charles protested he had never been told. William answered, "You signed a sworn acknowledgement of it." The photocopy, dated November 1999, slid across the table like a royal verdict, waiting 27 years to strike. Charles stared at his own signature as though it belonged to someone else. The solicitor calmly explained that the acknowledgement had been buried inside a massive 100-page financial restructuring involving 6 different royal properties. Ravensmere appeared only once under an obscure legal reference number, and once under a historic estate name abandoned in 1936. Whether Charles signed without understanding its consequences or believed he could rewrite them later no longer mattered. The reality was far more dangerous. The succession clause could only be altered with the written consent of the surviving estate trustees. Decades earlier, there had been several. Now, only one trustee possessed the authority that mattered. Prince William had become the final gatekeeper of Ravensmere, without anyone fully appreciating the power quietly resting in his hands. That revelation exposed an entirely different struggle that had unfolded months before anyone entered the estate office. Charles had already attempted to solve the problem behind closed palace doors. Instead of approaching William personally, a trusted palace aide delivered a confidential proposal described as a necessary continuity arrangement. The language sounded harmless, almost administrative, but William immediately ignored the reassuring wording and focused on one simple question: who ultimately benefits from this arrangement? 2 anxious days later, the answer arrived. A new family trust would quietly benefit Camilla's children and grandchildren. William never negotiated. He never requested amendments. He simply returned the proposal with one word written boldly across every page: rejected. That rejection did not end the operation. It merely forced those behind it to become more creative. Charles refused to surrender. A second legal strategy appeared, cleverly designed to avoid violating the bloodline restriction while achieving exactly the same outcome. Instead of transferring ownership, Camilla's family would receive a 99-year lease for the symbolic rent of £1. Officially, Ravensmere would remain inside the royal family. In reality, William and every future heir would lose practical control of the estate for nearly a century. It was an elegant workaround, almost impossible to detect unless someone remembered another forgotten clause hidden inside the Queen Mother's trust documents. She had anticipated exactly this possibility decades earlier. Any lease exceeding 21 years required unanimous written approval from every living trustee. Once again, William refused. The second plan collapsed before it could leave the solicitor's office. Most families would have accepted defeat. Instead, something happened that convinced William the legal battle had quietly transformed into a physical one. 3 weeks later, private construction contractors appeared at Ravensmere. They were not repairing leaking roofs or restoring damaged plasterwork. They measured the West Wing, inspected historic kitchens for modernization, and examined the old nursery corridor for conversion into luxury family apartments. No one informed William. No permission was requested. Someone behaved as though approval had already been secured. Every measurement suggested confidence. Every survey suggested expectation. Someone believed Ravensmere's future had already been decided behind William's back. Inside the estate office, Camilla fought back. She insisted nothing illegal had occurred. The surveys were preliminary. The furniture remained undelivered. No formal lease existed. Every statement was technically correct, yet Wiliam ignored the technicalities. His concern was never whether ownership had already changed. His concern was proving that expensive preparations had been made for an inheritance the law never allowed. Camilla's son angrily shoved a folder aside, insisting they acted only because they trusted repeated assurances. Wiliam answered with icy precision. Assurances are not legal ownership. Every eye turned toward Charles because everyone understood who had made those assurances. Charles finally lost his composure. He accused Wiliam of turning a private family matter into unnecessary conflict. Wiliam's reply struck even harder. It remained private until illegal trust funds paid for it. Suddenly, this was no longer about inheritance, promises, or future family arrangements. Financial accountability had entered the room. Trustees possess legal responsibilities that cannot disappear behind royal tradition. Wiliam was no longer acting simply as the Prince of Wales or as Charles's son. He was acting as the trustee legally required to investigate every questionable expense connected with Ravensmere. Camilla immediately recognized the wider danger. If Wiliam examined one estate this thoroughly, how many other royal properties could face similar scrutiny? Her strategy changed instantly. She stopped arguing about renovations and instead asked the question that terrified everyone. If we cannot inherit Ravensmere, who will? The solicitor slowly turned to the fourth page of the opinion. His voice remained calm even as every heartbeat inside the room accelerated. Upon King Charles's death, the life interest would automatically expire. The entire Ravensmere estate would pass to the next eligible beneficiary identified under the active trust provisions. Camilla's daughter interrupted confidently, assuming the answer was obvious. Surely it would be Wiliam. The Prince of Wales had fought harder than anyone to protect the estate. Surely he intended to inherit it himself. But the solicitor calmly revealed something nobody present knew. 9 days earlier, Wiliam had legally renounced his own claim. The room froze. Charles stared in disbelief. Camilla's family looked completely lost. Even palace advisors had never been informed. Wiliam had spent months defending Ravensmere, only to remove himself from its line of succession. If he no longer wanted the estate, then who had he been protecting it for? The solicitor lifted the final page, prepared to reveal a name capable of changing the balance of the royal family forever. The silence inside Ravensmere became almost unbearable as everyone waited for the answer.